We are very excited today to welcome Emily Varon, BCBA and sleep educator, to our podcast. Welcome, Emily.
Hello.
Now, you've been with us before.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about sleep and the importance of sleep. And I know that that was your passion. But lately in our conversations, you've kind of been diving into a new passion. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So just kind of being out and about in the world of the internet, I've just seen so much burnout in the field of ABA. And the more I looked into it, the more I saw this sort of like bi-directional relationship between burnout and poor sleep and burnout. And so it sort of took me down the rabbit hole of figuring out, well, is it because everyone's not sleeping that we're so burned out, or are we so burned out that we're just not sleeping well? And the more I kind of researched and looked at, Google Scholar and looked for data on burnout, it was a fact. It turned out that my hypothesis was right, that poor sleep contributes significantly to burnout, and people who are experiencing burnout tend to have extremely poor sleep. So that drove me to really start talking about it a little bit more with other ABA professionals. And that's sort of how we sort of ended up here today with each other, because we sort of want to talk about the burnout side a lot and reduce that for our people. And then I bring the added extra of how do we get more sleep as well, so that it's not the monster feeding the monster.
And it's such a circular argument too. And, I get it. When I don't have sleep, I feel so crappy. But, when I'm stressed out and I'm burnt out, I don't sleep at night. It got to a point a couple of years ago where I would be waking up on a Sunday night, and I'd be sweating because I was dreading. I had the Monday morning dreads, or I call them the Sunday night dreads, right? And I would be just, drenched in sweat because I was so not looking forward to Monday. I was completely anxious. I was so burnt out. But as a result, I wasn't sleeping. So when Monday did come around, I was exhausted. And I didn't have the capability to really deal with that stress because I hadn't slept the night before. So I wasn't sleeping the night before because I was completely stressed out, but I was completely stressed out because I wasn't sleeping.
Exactly. And so where do we plug the hole? Right?
Yeah. And it's
how do we stop the stop the leak, right?
And it's such an important topic. I think we've all been there as BCBAs. And I would say, the three of us are probably on the more experienced, older generation, unfortunately, of BCBAs. And there's a whole new slew of BCBAs as, more people are passing their exam, coming into the field, receiving less training, receiving less supervision, receiving less quality of education around ABA. And that's really why, Shayna and I started the community that we have, is to serve this need, to help people with burnout. But I think before we get into that, how would you define burnout? Like, what exactly is burnout for someone who maybe hasn't figured out that that's what they're feeling?
There is a definition. I actually have a whole definition page on the workbook that I'm about to finish, that we'll talk about in a second. But burnout is definable. It's definition worthy, and it's the experience of work that is basically deteriorating your quality of life, essentially, without actually looking at the definition. But yeah, I mean, burnout can make you feel like your relationships are worse. Burnout can make you feel like you have no purpose. Burnout can lead to depression and anxiety. I mean, burnout in general just has this sort of domino effect of garbage that just leads to other things like poor sleep and like feelings of hopelessness and feeling stuck and all of those things. So, especially for us working in a service field where we are working with families who are burned out for different reasons, right? So burnout just doesn't have to just be for professionals. I mean, we got moms that are burned out, dads that are burned out, right? Parents and caregivers who are just burned out on how much work it is to keep their kids happy, alive, I mean, in school, stimulated, reducing their behaviors. There's just so much that parents are going through. And now we're going to be burned out and then go try to help the burned out families. It doesn't work. We have to be pouring from a full cup, not from an empty cup. We are no use if, in the service field, right?
I just finished giving a webinar for our CEU community, and we talked a bit about being drained and that feeling of I feel drained. But putting it differently, what in your life is leaking, right? Examine your life and go, okay, there's parts that may have holes in them, and I feel like I'm just leaking, and it's a bucket with all these holes in it, which is another good analogy.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest part about burnout is also that it kind of creeps up on you. It's not like one day you're fully energized and then the next day you're like, this isn't working for me. It really kind of snowballs and you're taking on more and you're feeling more stressed and until you wake up one day and you're like, what is going on? But it's hard to realize that that's what you're in if you're just feeling hopelessness or stress or anxiety.
100%. I mean, look, we are in a field of do-gooders. No one came into this field to, for the money. No one came into this field to just, really to get yourself published. We enter the field because we want to do good, because we want to help, because we want to feel satisfied in our job. And part of that is feeling like we're helpful, feeling like we're getting results. And that drives our hopefulness and our feeling of purpose and our feeling of doing good and making families feel better and making, seeing progress with the children and, or the people that we serve. And if things fall out of balance where maybe we're not able to see as much progress because we're not getting as much supervision and we, are always having this, let's call it this revolving door of staff, right? Because the constant staff changes, prevents us from, being able to make these solid relationships with families, because now families are looking to us for answers that we don't have. Like, when are we going to get a new RBT? When are we going to have all of our hours fulfilled? Right? My child has 20 hours. We're only getting 7. When are you going to have the staff? Now that compromises our ability to enjoy the goodies, right? We're not going to see the progress. We're not going to have those good relationships with families. Now we're dealing with the stuff that we didn't come into the field for. And that contributes to burnout, right? That makes us feel like this isn't what I'm here for. I'm here because I love data, because I love progress, because I love, right? I mean, even the people who might not even be in the field, because they love the families, and there are those people that's okay. If we love data and if we love progress, that's good enough, right? We have a lot of data fans in our world, and that's okay, because when you feel that joy of seeing programs mastered, that leaks out, and that makes the families feel good, and that makes the RBTs feel good. That makes everyone feel good. So even if you're not a touchy-feely, caring kind of person, that's okay to care about the data. That's good enough too. But if we're not seeing that, if we're not getting that, if we're constantly training our new RBTs, if we're constantly training new supervisors, if we're always in that cycle of training and doing and not really, being able to get in there and do the thing we love to do, analyze the data, because maybe there is no data for a couple of weeks because someone's constantly rapport building, right?
And I think it's what, exactly you said, know what your reinforcers are. For me, it's not the data. I find that also, when you become a BCBA, your job really changes. And now where I used to have more interaction with kids and I used to speak more with families, now I find myself doing more of the training and the management and the scheduling and the stuff that I this wasn't on the task list. Like I didn't get into it for this, but every once in a while I'll have some time to like sit in on a session or run a session or do an intake with a kid. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like this is why I'm doing this, because the kids are fun. I want to be able to show the staff how to do ABA. Like I was doing language for learning with a student the other day. The staff had never seen language for learning. They didn't know what it was. I was training a senior therapist and like on this program. And I was just so excited to like show them this amazing program. And the time flew by and I was like, okay, now I remember like why I'm here, even for the other things that are so frustrating. So I think for everybody, it's tapping into your reinforcers and are you getting enough of those?
Yeah. I remember there was a time when we were just in this, it was during the transition, not many people were around when in the United States, there was this huge push over to insurance. And pretty much within a 2-year span, we had to go from state funding to private insurance funding within the span of 2 years. There was this huge shift over to how our funding was happening. So there was a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty. There were pay freezes. I remember that year I got a 25-cent raise and I was like, what are we doing here? What is this? I don't understand a 25-cent raise. But okay, like I went with it because I loved what I was doing. But during that time, there were people around me getting burnt out because they were getting caught up in that uncertainty. And what does that mean for my caseloads? We had that's when credentialing started being a thing, right? Like you had to be credentialed with the insurance provider. And now you were losing cases because you weren't Magellan credentialed, or you weren't Aetna credentialed, or you weren't, Blue Cross Blue Shield credentialed. So now you couldn't serve those cases, right? You couldn't bill on cases if you weren't credentialed. And that was and then the RBT came around and then the insurances were demanding RBTs. So you had to have that registered. I mean, it was just such a time of uncertainty.
Very demanding.
Very demanding and very confusing and very uncertain. And I just remember feeling like, oh my gosh, is the field imploding? What is going to happen? Are we going to have to give services away for free? And there was this uncertainty was just really fueling a lot of burnout, and people left. There was a great exodus during that time. It was like
we didn't have that many to spare.
Right. And that was right around 2012, 2013. And I got my BCBA in 2011. So this was, I was only a year or two not into the field, but into my certification, where I was taking on these different sort of roles and responsibilities. And I just remember feeling like, okay, do I stay or do I go? We stayed and we figured it out, and it was meaningful, and it turned out good, and it turned out great. But you're right, Share, of like plugging into those reinforcers, because I was in a position where I could help people transition. I could help people with that feeling of uncertainty and going like, no, hold on. The world isn't imploding. And that really was a time when I sort of found my way and found my reinforcers within work, because the other stuff was falling apart, right? The stuff that I couldn't control anything, but I could help people feel less out of control.
Yeah.
I developed I didn't develop it, but I brought to the table this idea of wrapping the poop in a Tiffany's box. We didn't really call it poop, the SH. Wrapping it in a Tiffany's box. And then, it sort of became like, okay, this is garbage. We know this is garbage. We know this is hard. How are we going to wrap it in the Tiffany's box to make it so that our people feel supported, like this is positive, like this is good? Mm-hmm. So I feel like we're in that place again with more uncertainty and, with corporate takeovers of ABA companies. And this is what I'm hearing a lot of. How are we going to serve our families if we're being, if a corporation oversees us and not BCBAs, and that feels uncertain, and pay feels uncertain because we're getting to 80-day, 80-day reimbursements. It's taking 80 days for
Wow.
companies to get reimbursed from insurance.
Long time.
So we're back in this place of uncertainty. So how do
she,
we wrap it in the Tiffany's box, ladies?
I mean, Shira and I, when we first started How to ABA, we had that discussion because, it's all of everything you just mentioned, Emily, but it's also as, new BCBAs come into this profession, or as ABA RBTs come into this profession, they get into it because they want to work with kids, and then they realize there's something more and it's exciting. And, then they start analyzing data and figuring out what to do with that data and, building and building and building. But there's not enough education. I mean, some people have really amazing supervisors, but other people don't. And, Shira and I are like, well, okay, so you get that piece of paper, your BCBA, and if you haven't had amazing supervision, then what? To give you an example, I'm working with somebody right now, I'm supervising her for her BCBA, and she's amazing. But I'm going through assessment with her, and, I'm saying, okay, well, let's look at the ABLEs, let's look at the BB map, when do we use each one of them? Let's do a sample. So one of the clients we work with together, I said, great, let's fill out a VB map for this person. And she did it. And she said afterwards, thanks, that was an excellent exercise. And I said, well, how long did that take you? And she said, well, about 5 hours.
Zoe.
Yeah. And I said, to fill it, it takes me, it depends, but I mean, I've been doing this for years, and it takes me anywhere from like half an hour to an hour tops. Right. And by, 2 hour mark, I've got a program, I've got everything, and it's all good. Right. So, I think us as big corporations take over, or even as seasoned BCBAs are at the top of the company, they're giving newer BCBAs things to do that they would just assume only take this amount of time. Like, if I'm giving somebody something to do, I'm going to say, okay, well, you can do that BB map for the student today, and you can do this, and you can do that, because that's what I could get done in a day.
Yeah.
But I'm not taking that perspective of, wow, a new BCBA may take longer, will take longer until they're getting that experience. So us as seasoned BCBAs need to be able to put ourselves in that mind space of, hey, remember way back when we were there, we took that long as well.
Well, let me tell you something about that. I'll paint a little more perspective on that. Is there are so many brand new BCBAs, that seasoned BCBAs, we are stretched, right? Like, it used to be that when I first started considering myself, let's say a seasoned BCBA, and I'll call that, let's call it 2018, 2019 was when I had like 8 years being an actual BCBA, right? By then, I was already out of the actual day-to-day field. I wasn't overlapping new BCBAs anymore. Because I was seasoned, I had a very small caseload of maybe 4 or 5 families. And then I was doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, right? We were doing a lot of problem solving. We'd be called in to do certain things, or maybe we were reviewing reports and giving feedback in that way. I was doing a lot more indirect. I wasn't out in the field as much. And I think that is the trend, is that when you get, let's call it a seasoned BCBA, right? Someone who's been a BCBA for 5 years or more, let's call it, we're not in the field anymore. We're being utilized in other ways. So now we have a saturation of newer BCBAs of 5 years or less, who are now training up to 15 new BCBAs themselves. And then, us, seasoned BCBAs are only being called in to put out fires, or when it's really necessary. We just don't have, I feel like we're now the clinical directors, and we are now the program managers, and we are now, we are dealing with insurances directly, right? We are the insurance liaisons, and we are reviewing the reports for fidelity, and we're reviewing the reports for, can we submit this? Is this submittable to an insurance company? So we're being asked to do more of these sort of high level things. And now we have new BCBAs training new BCBAs.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that we're stretched so thin that sometimes we lose sight of our responsibility to speak to the quality of the programs that's happening on the floor. And it is our responsibility. But I think sometimes, it's definitely, there's a bit of a lack in the training and supervision that happens in our field. And the fact that somebody who's just started collecting their hours is, you can call it wants to take initiative, a little bit overzealous, or a little bit, not knowing where their skills are and wanting to take on more than they actually can. And I think people need to slow down. Just because you're collecting BCBA hours, you have so much to learn and you have so much to gain. And I mean, I've had this experience myself. We're hiring people who have never really done any kind of supervision work, but they don't want to work as an RPT, as a therapist. They only want to be given a supervision role. And this is in no one's best interest. You need to learn how to be a BCBA, and you'll learn best how to be a BCBA by working with other BCBAs. And I was remembering that for years, I was a BCBA for years, and Shayna and I would go together. I was always tagging along. I was never being leave me on my own. I'm good.
I was just going to say that in the early years, now I joined the ABA world in 2000. Okay. So going back a lot of years here.
Long time.
But I mean, in 2000, there weren't enough cases to just be a supervisor. You couldn't you could not fill a full, 40-hour work week just with supervision. There just weren't enough kids to treat back then, right? Because the kids weren't really getting diagnoses at a very great rate. And when there were other services, whatever, you had to be an RBT or a BT or whatever that was called at the, back in the day. You had to do direct service and supervision at the same time. You had to, not necessarily for yourself, but I had 20 hours of direct service. And then I also had 10 or 15 hours of supervision for other cases, right? There was not 30 hours to bill or 20 hours to bill just as a supervisor. So I think the more and more children who were getting diagnosed, then there became this sort of separation of, okay, these are the people who provide the services and these are the people who supervise. Where it wasn't like that until 2009, 2010. Please excuse my barky dog. But it wasn't really like that. You had to be a direct service provider and a supervisor at the same time, just because that's how you filled your day, right? But now that there's sort of this separation, it's sort of, okay, how do we pepper in these people who are supervisor levels, let's call it, but still keep their feet in the field?
Yeah, I think it's so important because we're losing sight. And I think as a field, we do so much better. Imagine if speech therapists stopped doing direct therapy and, just kind of train someone who maybe had some certification to all of a sudden take all their clients. And I'm seeing the field go in that direction. And we are losing sight of a lot of the hands-on, the expertise that we can offer beyond documentation and paperwork and scheduling. That's not our skill set. Our skill set is, with the kids, with the programs, with the families. And I think we lose sight of that. And it's kind of unfortunate.
But that's why I love what you guys do so much, because you're actually those people who aren't getting the benefit of excellent supervision, meaning you're getting your hours, but no one's actually teaching you how to work smarter, not harder, how to make it easier on yourself, how to take simple data, how to
ABA.
Exactly. And, not everyone has excellent supervisors. Not everyone has a supervisor who's willing to take the time and sit down and teach you how to do your job, because it's complicated. CPAs do not have easy jobs. We wear lots of hats, sometimes all at the same time. And, if our supervisors aren't, our current BCBAs aren't either able to because they don't have the skill set because they weren't taught, or they don't have the time to sit down with new BCBAs, it's a recipe for burnout. I mean, the new BCBAs are just going to say, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up to have this much stress, because no one taught them how to allocate time to certain things, to work smarter, not harder, to multitask in an effective way. I talk about that a lot in the workbook that I'm putting together, almost done. But in the workbook, it literally breaks down a session. what should a 2-hour session look like? What should a 3-hour session look like? And people are working from home at night. And I'm like, why? You have 3 hours in the field once a week. You could potentially overlap this client for 3 hours. What are you doing with your time? Well, if all you ever saw was your supervisor, like analyzing data and sitting with you in the room and observing, well, yeah, that's what your 3 hours are going to be filled with. And how boring is that? I don't want to sit and watch.
It's like my biggest pet peeve.
Right? Just sitting there and
watching. You can get so much done overlapping a session. You could train, you could supervise, you can watch the child, you can update, you can do all of that.
You can write your reports. You don't have to write them at night. You can, but people say, oh, but then the parents are going to think I'm not doing my job. No, writing a report is your job. That's your job. Yes. You have a job to write an excellent report on behalf of this child. What's done during session, yes.
Yeah, when I used to go into sessions, at home, I would bring my laptop, like at someone else's home, I would bring my laptop with me and, spend part of the session. I hated observing, first of all, because, accessing my reinforcer, like Shira said, is the kid. But it's also the therapist. And I call it like jumping into the table or jumping into playtime. Yeah. And I love being with a child, teaching. I love that aspect of it. So by me doing that, I can jump in, get my fix, but also then, BST model, right? I'm modeling what I want it to look like. But as I'm doing that, I'm also looking at error analysis. Like, okay, where is this student erroring and how can we change that? And then from there, I step back, have the RBT, start doing some programming, grab my laptop and, start working. And then, put my laptop down. It says dance because I'm not completely typing the whole time, right? Yeah. Come back and forth. If the parent wants to talk to me, I try and close my laptop altogether, put it away. And then I got smart. I actually used to schedule about, 15 minutes, 20 minutes just in my car before I go to my next client. So I have my travel time, but I wouldn't do it anywhere in the vicinity of the client's house because what would happen is parents would see me and want me to talk to me more. So I would leave politely. And I would get in my car, go around the corner. I would sit in like a plaza or, a subdivision parked at the side of the road. And I would actually type my notes quietly in my car because it would take me 15 minutes to type my notes as soon as I left versus when I got home, making dinner, having to deal with family stuff. And then later on, or 3 days later, I have 4 other clients and I forget what happened. It takes me an hour. So it's nice to be able to schedule that time in if you can right after the fact.
Yeah. And another thing I talk about is that piece of communication, right? If you just walk in and pop open your laptop, people are going to think you're playing games and checking email. But if you communicate ahead of time and say, okay, mom, dad, whoever's home, hey, guess what? Kiddo has, I know people hate the word kiddo. I'm just going to say it. Kiddo has, people have weird pet peeves. Kiddo has their report due soon. Here's what the next 4 to 6 weeks are going to look like when I come in. And I want to share with you what that's going to look like and schedule out and pace out what you're going to be doing and say, are there things that you want to discuss with me, right? Is there anything pressing? And then you can schedule out that session. You can say, okay, that sounds really important. Let me give you 20 minutes right now, and then I will do this in whatever. We use visual schedules for the children we serve all the time, but we never use them for ourselves.
Oh, I do. I'm all over it.
You have to. So you can say sticky note, say, okay, look, you have to talk to me about, you want to chat with me about their IEP, right? Like, we don't really do IEPs that much anymore. We're not in the district as much. We do have district-based, BCBAs, but, if we're talking about home sessions, right? You want to talk to me about their IEP to go over it. Okay, that'll take about 20 minutes. Can we do that at 10:30 this morning? There are a few things I need to do first. Can I have your time at 10:30? And now you've just scheduled a session, a little mini session with the caregiver, right? Or same thing with the RBT. Are there programs that you want me to see today? Yes? Okay, let's run that one first. So I can look at it because I want to talk to mom at 10:30, but I have to look at the data book for 20 minutes in between. So just communicating, having this language, letting them know this is all the things that are involved in my job. I'm going to write them down on the sticky note. Here it is for me, for you, for whoever. Or maybe even just verbally communicating it, whatever. I mean, just depends on what kind of learners you're dealing with, because your RBT might not be the same kind of learner and communicator that your caregivers are, right? You're going to have learners, like different learning styles across caregivers, across RBTs, the occupational therapist that you need to collaborate with, right? We need to know how they need to have information given to them. Some of them might be the sticky notes, some of them might be verbal. Some of them might need, visual, verbal reminders. In 5 minutes, I'm going to watch that program. Are you paced out? Okay. Is 5 minutes still okay for me to watch that program? Maybe they're not watching the clock. But that communication piece is important, because I feel like then you're not leaving it up to other people to wonder what you're doing and wonder if you're doing your job.
I'm really excited that we are talking about burnout in our field. When I got into the field, nobody discussed burnout, and it wasn't okay to discuss burnout. It was almost like a weakness. If someone said, I'm feeling really stressed out, or, I'm burnt out, or I've got too many things to do, it was considered your kryptonite, right? It was your weakness. Heaven forbid you talk about that. And it's so great that we have a community of professionals now who understand burnout, and we're talking about it more and more and more. I think the issue lies with the fact that when people say, well, burnout, just schedule time for yourself. The question is how? That's stressing me out even more when I think about that. I can't schedule time for myself because I've got this, and this to do. So I'm really excited that you're coming out with, kind of a how-to guide of here's some really great practical tips to not only avoid burnout in the first place, but if you are burnt out, here's how to get yourself out of that hole and try and get your life back.
Yes. Because once we have some balance, work doesn't feel so overwhelming. And then we can have time to sleep. And then we can have time for our self-care. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I see the buzzing out on the internet, make time for self-care, avoid burnout, make time for self-care. Well, how do I do that? I know what my self-care looks like. I know what I need. That doesn't mean I'm going to make time for it. And that doesn't mean I feel like I know how to make time for it. How do I create time when I'm writing my reports from home until midnight? I can't go take a bath. I can't go take a 20-minute bath, a 30-minute bath. I have 6 assessments to score. Right? How do
I'm guilty of this. I know I need to go outside. I know that energizes me. And yet day after day, I'm I wasn't outside today. I wasn't. And it's because I was too busy and I didn't have time. So I'm excited to hear what your suggestions are.
Or because it's 0 degrees where you are, Shira.
No, that can't be why. Not because of the snowstorm.
No, but it's so true. It's so true. We want to prioritize the things that we owe other people first, because we're good people, right? And we don't want to leave anyone else hanging. So there is this kind of intrinsic nature to, gosh, I have this responsibility to either the client or the funding source or whatever. I know I have to get this work done. But you don't know what you don't know. And what you don't know is that you lost so much time during the day today doing things that aren't priorities, right? You lost so much session time today. You could have done it. And so that's what the webinar that we're coming out with, that's what that's going to talk about. We're going to talk about that. That's what my workbook is for. It's to show people you do have time during the day to do all the things so that you don't have to compromise your self-care, your personal time, your relationships, your bedtime. You don't have to compromise those things to be a good BCBA.
So there's going to be a link in the show notes for your workbook that you're coming out with. But let's chat a little bit more about the burnout webinar that we're planning on doing.
Yes. I'm excited. I think we're going to have a lot of really helpful tips for people, not just tips. I think tips is a little pithy, but we're going to have some hardcore strategies that people can walk away from the webinar with actionable items that they can implement the next day during session, during their day. You're going to have a whole reframing of how you look at your day and your job. And I think you're going to come out refreshed.
Yeah. And I think, we kind of cross paths on this passion, because so much of what we do with How to ABA is empower people to prevent this burnout. If you have access to the community and the templates and the resources, you don't have to feel like you're recreating the wheel with each client. And so we've become so passionate about training the next generation of potential BCBAs to not feel overwhelmed, to be able to lean on somebody, to have a community. And then, together with you and the strategies that we're going to discuss on the webinar, I think it will be like really, really important for a new BCBA, for a seasoned BCBA, for anyone who's kind of been there, even has anything to contribute, because they've learned from their experiences. And I know it will be very valuable. And I think it will, really help a lot of people.
I agree. I think they're going to come out with some really good stuff and feel less burned out and feel more supported, and become the role models for the other people that they work with around them, because suddenly you're going to feel refreshed and people are going to go, I want what she's having.
What are you taking? Yeah. So right now we're planning for March 1st. It is at 8 p.m. Eastern. It is an evening, and it's free to attend. We're just super excited to host a discussion, to add value, to give people the strategies, actionable tips, things like that. So you'll get more information in the show notes, and we really hope to see you all there.
Yes, I'm excited.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
See you soon.